anyone else coming?
We tried to move people to up. There are a lot of people using.
That's all right. Yep, I'll just put it up on the site afterwards anyway. Should we close the door? You alright, someone please close the door. Thank you. So today's tutorial is just going to be basic Git tutorial. We'll just start off by going through some definitions. It'll give a couple examples of the main Git repositories, what the differences between them are. It will then we'll set up a Git repository or Git account with GitLab, which is the university provided service, and we'll learn how to add a file, commit it, and create a branch, a couple of different branches, and merge branches and so forth. So to start off, I'd like to go through a couple of definitions. So Git is a version control system for tracking changes in files amongst multiple people. It's primarily used for source code management in developing software, but it really can be used to track changes in any sets of files. It's a distributed revision control system, which basically means that it has a central repository, which is either GitLab, GitHub, or Bitbucket, but you can run it on, or you can have multiple people can have access to it in multiple different locations. So the repository or the repo, it's usually a directory that's located remotely, and it stores all the files and folders and content for the project. The master is the main branch, and depending on the workflow, is the one where people work on or the one where the integration happens. So a branch is a version of the repository that differs. It's not the right word, it's an error. That differs from the main work project. Branches can be a new version of a repository, experimental changes, or personal forks, or a repository of users to alter and test changes. So what you can do is have, say if you're creating a website and you've got a production environment, that could be the, that you can put that into the main master branch. You can have multiple people working on the development branches, and basically each one submitting to the development branch, and once it's tested, you can upload the changes to the master and basically merge all the different code versions into one working set of code. You can check out. The git checkout command is used to switch branches. So if you want to switch between testing or master, you can use the command to switch between the branches. So you can either submit directly to the test branch or directly to the master branch. Clone. So cloning is, you might have used clone before. It's when you use the command git clone, then the location and dot into the local directory or whichever directory you want. It basically just makes a clone of the code, online code, down to creating a local copy of it. Commit submits files to the local repository, and I'll go through a workflow later on which shows the difference between local, staging, and the repo. You can fetch or pull. If someone has changed code on a separate branch of the project and wants it to be reviewed to add to the master branch, that someone can put in a pull request. Pull request asks the repo maintainers to review the comments made, and then if acceptable, merge changes upstream. A pull happens when adding the changes to the master branch. Remote. So when we talk about remote, we talk about remote locations. So there's 3 locations which I mentioned earlier, which is local, staging, and remote. The remote is obviously somewhere else other than where you are. Push, you can update a remote branch by making commits to the current branch. So pushes the commit changes to the remote location. A fork is just creating a copy of a repository into a separate branch, and merge is when you're merging a number of different branches. There are three main online repositories, which are GitLab, which is the one we'll be using. You can make accounts with GitHub or Bitbucket. The reason why I use GitLab is because our university provides free accounts for us, so we get a few more features. GitLab is unlimited. So GitHub is. So yeah.
But after 3 or 4 years, we can still use it as an application.
That I'm not too sure about. Yeah, or as long as you've got your university email, you should be able to. But you can actually move repositories from one to the other. So you just once you download the code, you can just start a new repository with someone else and upload it. The differences between them usually come with price. So I'll just go through this first. In terminology, yep. Yeah, a bit bigger. So the differences in terminology, there's a couple of differences. So Bitbucket and GitHub are fairly similar. So a pull request is the same as a merge request. So I think merge request makes more sense because what you're trying to do is merge the two branches together into one. A snippet is just a bit of code. So a snippet of code is generally a term in computer programming. In terms of a project, in GitHub, the repository is the main area within the, it holds the main master branch, which I'll show a bit later on. And they use project. I prefer repo, but it's essentially the same thing, they're just different words for it. And in, let's see, Bitbucket, you use teams, GitHub, organization, and GitLab is groups. So it's basically just adds user groups, and you can add different group level management options like permissions and so forth for each person within the group. Now, there are differences in pricing. So with GitLab, we don't have to use anything. I don't have to pay anything. With Bitbucket, for small teams, it's free for up to 5 users. So you have unlimited repos or projects. I'll make that a bit bigger. So you get unlimited projects, but it's only free for up to 5 users. So it's useful if you've got a group of less than 5 people. Then if you want to change, or if you want to have more than 5 users, it starts at $10 per month, and you still get unlimited users. Or you get unlimited users, but you have to pay $2 per user per month. So it quickly adds up price. For large teams, you pay $5 per user per month, and you get a few more different features. GitHub.
For those inclusions at the moment,
These ones.
500 minutes per month or 1 gig per month, does that really, how much of an impact does that have?
Well, in terms of storage, not so much unless your project is extremely large and used by a whole bunch of people. So if you've got a project which has 10 megabyte files, so that could be updated. If the whole thing's downloaded, it can be downloaded, say, 1,000 times a month. Build minutes, I'm not too sure actually. I have to look that one up because I've always used GitHub as a repository as opposed to something where because build implies that it's building some sort of software. So it might have to do with the pipelines. So I'll have a look at that. And I've never come. Yeah. Software. software, sorry?
software development.
Well, yeah, that's what it is. So I mean, you still using GitHub for software development in terms of the way I use it is basically I have, say, if I got a whole bunch of R scripts, I run it, then I commit the changes when I'm ready. In terms of building, if you're building software on GitHub, you probably wouldn't do it unless you're doing some form of C programming, for example, where you have to actually build the software. So it depends whether your software is, requires building or it's already pre-built.
Yeah.
So something like Perl, R, and say PHP, even they're pre-compiled software. So if you build, you're compiling your software on here. So, but I would usually I wouldn't use it that way. I'd just basically compile it on my own machine and then upload the code to there. So I'll have a look. It could mean that, but we'll see if it's been useful. But I've never used it. But if it's useful for everyone else, it does have that in the account. For GitHub, it's free for public and open source projects. So a personal account has unlimited public repositories, unlimited private repositories, unlimited collaborators, free for students as part of that. For a team, that's individual, so I'm not sure where. I mean, you're still paying for a little bit of it, so I'm not sure where it actually is limited. This one, team, so it's $9 per user per month. So this must be just for one person. If it's just one person developing one project, you pay $7 per month. But then if you're a team of people collaborating, then you have to pay $9 per user per month, and obviously that goes up a bit more. You can use GitHub for hosting. So for example, there's a program called Jekyll, which some of you might know, which is it takes Markdown and creates static websites. Irene was actually has one of these set up, which we might go through later on. There's something like that where you can actually host static websites, static pages, and you could use GitHub for that. And yeah, it's just another different version of so the business plans cost a bit more, but you get 24-hour support 5 days a week or 7 days a week. GitLab is for personal projects, it's nothing. You get community support and a few other, it's the forum where you can go in and ask questions. It's also unlimited in the sense you can start up as many public repositories as you like, and also users as well. But I think it's unlimited because we get with our university name, we can log in and create as many projects as we want, which I'll show you how to do.
What's the level that the university subscribes to then?
I'm not quite sure. So I found, yeah, I mean, I think for the level we're starting off now, just knowing that we can log in anytime we want and create a page, create a repository is good enough. I think I might do a bit more, later on, a more in-depth look at GitLab especially, and give some more complex examples and things. So for our purposes, I'll be using GitLab because it provides accounts for us to use. So Git is a powerful system for managing plain text files mainly, so mainly source code, and coordinated work on those files among a number of people. Infrastructure services has really made a university-wide Git service available here. So if I take that address and put in, where's my mouse? There it is. Here. Log in. think you might be right. Excellent, thank you. So yep, you can log in. If we go to, there should be a main page somewhere. I might have gone past it because I've already set this up. But this basically just shows your front page. So you have all your projects here. I've created a test one, it's a test project.
Is that when you get to start?
Yes, that's what you should get. So when you get up to there, I think I'll put it through in here. Anyway, so when I go through the example, I've put photos of, or pictures, screenshots of what it should look like. So any university or staff member is welcome. So there's no registration required. Interested users can simply sign in with their university credentials. Host up to 10 projects by default. This number can be increased on request. Service is also available externally, so any external collaborators can make use of it. To request an account from an external collaborator, an email to the following address is required. So that's pretty good if you're using, if you've got people collaborating with people overseas. You've also got a GUI client for Windows and Mac if you prefer to use that instead of the command line, but I'll be using the command line mainly. And this is just some workshops which might be of interest if you want to have a look later on. So advantages with Git, the work is backed up, multiple versions are kept. So let's say if you're developing and you've added, say, 10 different versions you thought did work, and you find out that version 7 was working better than version 8, you can go back, extract version 7, and then start again. It's easy to allow collaborative work over multiple people on remote sites and work in multiple locations. The code is kept off site, so it's essentially backed up, and it's easy to share code. So if you get to some of the meanings behind it, Git has 3 main states that your files can reside in: committed, modified, and staged. Committed means that your data is safely stored on your local machine. Modified means that you've made changes but have not committed it to your machine. It says database, but it means machine. Staged means that you have marked a modified file in its current version and it's ready to go to your next commit. So this leads us to the main 3 areas of a Git project. So the Git directory, the working tree, and the staging area. So this is the basic workflow. You've got your repository here on the right, which is hosted by GitLab. And when you check out a project, you basically pulling it back towards you and it goes through the working directory. Your working directory is your local computer. So you can do it on your local machine, or you can install it on your local machine, or you can use it on Helix or something like that. You edit your changes, you add them to your staging area, and once you've added them to the staging area, you commit them back to the repository. Now if I go to an example Git page, so this is called the repository. So this is the the repository, and this is what it looks like when you're downloading or when it's available for people to look at. So it has all the files, it has the number of commits, contributors, and so forth, and it says which branch you're currently looking into. And if we scroll down a bit more, we can start going into the tutorial. So I've already gone in and signed in and created an account. So you can go to your university login, that page, put in your address, and once you're logged in, you come up to this landing page. So this landing page will allow you to create a project, create a group, explore public projects, learn more. From there, the next page, when you're creating on a project or creating a project, what you can do, you put in the project path, description, and whether you want that repository to be private internal or public.
So it can be private, yeah.
It can be private, so private, which project access must be granted explicitly to each user. So you probably have to create a group, and then even if you have 10 members of that group, you have to explicitly give them permission to see it.
Yeah, like in South, we need to pay money. Right.
Yeah, so here you should be able to do it because that's what our contract subscription. Yes, that's what it allows. So from here we can create a project or a template, which is pretty cool if you have a couple of. So the templates allow for some JavaScript coding and Ruby on Rails and things like that. So we'll just set up all the blank files that you need to get your project going. If you just want a blank project, which is what I created, it will just have I think it'll just start off with an empty repository. So this, once you've created that page, so once you've submitted this, you'll go to the next page, which gives you some information. It says your repository is empty, and the important part here is giving you instructions on what you need to set it up. So I will log into Helix. Zoom in a bit more. So I've already set up the global config, and then I've created a directory which I've gone into, which is GitLab. Now, what I want to do is clone a new repository. So let's see if I can go back here and click on new project. So my project name is, say, test, and I'll make a public description, example, create, and then we've got the information up here, and then if we go here, we create a new repository here. Yep, cloned an empty repository, that's fine, because it's test. So if I ls to test, I can copy this command, touch, readme. So that all that does is create an empty readme file. So if I go readme and then type in copy, then I can. So the way it works is you have to add the file first. So when you add the file, what it does, it goes into, scroll back up here. Where's the image? There we go. So you've created the working directory by putting this command in. So the working directory is test. When you go add, you add it to the staging area. So now the file is stored in the staging area, which is in between, obviously, repository and working directory. But the working directory is, or the staging area is still locally on Helix at the moment. And then I have to commit. So git add readme. I've added it to the staging area, and then I want to push it. And when you push, you've pushed it up to the what's the name? Working area or the repository. But for some reason it gave me an error. So I'll have to test what this error is unauthorized access. So I've not added my username and email, which I thought you should only have to do once, but it looks like you may have to do it a couple of times each time you're working. Let's see how that works. So if we push that up, unauthorized access. Okay. So when I pushed it all earlier, I on Snowy, Git isn't installed by default. You'd have to go load. It shouldn't have made a difference, but we'll see. Yes, okay, so that's why it didn't work. You have to load the module Git before you can start uploading. So do my username. See, it worked and it pushed it up to GitLab test. So if we go back to here and have a look at the projects, my projects, we have test, and we have the README in there, and it has body. So what we can do to show it working, go into README, make a couple of changes. So you've made the change, so you go to Git, add README. So we've added it to the staging area. So we're going to commit, and when you're committing, you want to put in a message which is meaningful. So you can put something like a to for message, obviously, but more meaningful. And one file changed, it seemed to add the README. Yep. Okay. And then what you can do, you can also, you want to push the changes back up again. So we push it to the master. Looks like it worked fairly well. So if I refresh this, you see that it's updated the versioning of it. So if we go to the next example. Yep.
If I have a directory on Helix and a directory on laptop,
yep,
and we commit on Helix, what happens for the laptop?
Yeah. So what you should get into the habit of doing is when you're using this is pull down the latest changes. So what happens is if you make changes on your laptop, when you go to work on Helix, you can basically use the command pull, I think. So what it does, it actually just downloads the latest copy of the code and updates it with your local version. So you're always working on the latest bit of code. So it's just one command that you have to run each time to make sure that your code on your wherever you're working from is exactly the same as what's in the repository.
Is there any way to set your central repository so that because like this way, yeah. I mean, it seems like a safe thing to do to like first push your changes to the central and then pull those changes rather than try.
Sorry, I'm not sure what you mean. So you want to push it to Helix?
Yeah.
Well, Helix well, the central repository is with GitLab, so it's always going to be with
Oh,
GitLab.
so it's always there.
You can probably set one up with Helix, but it's probably more effort than it's worth. So you'd have to maintain the entire Git program and create groups and that sort of thing, and permissions. And if anything goes wrong with the program, you're gonna have to fix it up yourself. But most of the reason why we have GitHub in that is so it basically, well, we don't have to worry about the management of Git program itself on Helix. And so once you've set the gone through and created the repository, that was just an example of going through and adding to the branch, is what I went through here. And we went back to the Git page and we saw that the file was there. And we went through and we added another a change, and uploaded the change, and the changes were reflected in the repository. So what we want to do now is create a new branch. So if we go back here, what we're working on, the branches, we've only got one branch at the moment. We want to create a new branch, and we want to new branch, create branch. So a new branch is exactly the same as what you created it from. So we've basically created another version of the master repository. So once we've done that, what we can do is go check out -b new branch to change for the branch we're working to. So at the moment we're working with the master. So if we git check out -b new branch, you see down the bottom here it says we've switched to a new branch. So what does this mean? If we have a look at README and we say this is branch, we commit pretty much the same way. So go git commit -m. Yes, actually, sorry. Git add readme, git commit -m this to branch. It's done that correctly. And we need to push. Don't know why I didn't. What did I do? Yep, git push origin. So go git push origin branch. So what we were doing before is we were using master. So now we're using new branch. Details. And that's, yep, what that's done is pushed it. So if we go back to the files, we'll have a look at the new branch, see that that's on the new branch, but if you go to the master, it's not there. So what you want to do is create a merge request so you can get this. So usually the only people that uses, well, so anybody who uses GitHub or GitLab can make a merge request, but only the owner can actually merge the two branches together. So if we go here, so the merge request here, this is to add new branch. Request to branches. And you can assign it to somebody, add milestones, and so forth. Submit merge request. And because it's gone to me, I can go through and merge it. So what else is needed? Merge. Okay, so I've merged it. So if I have a look back here, look at my projects, test, the master, and it's merged both the new branch and the master. So that's obviously a very simple example. It can get a lot more complicated when you've got a couple hundred lines of code and people have done things the wrong way. So, for example, if you've got 600 lines of code, even if it's between two functions, and someone's made a change or added an extra function, but made a change halfway through the other functions, so the person whose job it is to merge it will hopefully be able to know what part of the code is affected and merge it without any errors. And okay, and from there, we've gone through and we've seen that the differences in the README file, they've been merged. And now what I want to do is just show, I'm sure most of us have probably done this sort of thing before. So I want to make a directory where I can clone someone else's repository. So if we have a look at this address, the GitHub New York Times page. So this is just an example of New York Times Objective-C style guide. So what we can do is git clone. So we take the address, we make a directory myt into myt, git clone. Yep. So you can also, if you've given people, if this is obviously a public repository, so if you want to share your code with people, all you have to do is just send them this address and they can clone that directory onto their local drive. We've got an exact copy of code from your repository. This is also fairly useful. It's a cheat sheet, so I use a lot of these because I keep forgetting all the different commands. So if I make this larger, so what this does, so if you forget, these are the mostly used commands. So if you forget how to configure your account, so the reason why you may want to configure your account is most of us would have GitHub accounts and so forth. So when you're running Git on your command line, you have to tell it which version of Git you're actually using. So if you're using GitHub, then you're signed in to GitHub on your command line. When you do an update, you might get an error if it's for a repository that you've created, which is for GitLab. So if you've only got one account, then it's not so much of a problem, but you just have to configure the user for that particular Git repository that you're using. You can start projects, certain things about ignoring files. Git status is actually pretty good as well. So it tells you what differences in, what's the difference between the different work areas. So the difference between your working directory, staging directory, and production. It says what's been committed and what hasn't been committed. And there's show differences between different areas, add files. Reset is useful as well. Because what that would do is reset a particular file. It'll remove, so say if you've updated a file locally, you've modified it too much and you want to change it back to normal, if you go reset, it'll change it back to the last version. You can remove files from your commits and from subsequently the repos. And you can also got information about the branching. So I haven't really gone through all that today because I wanted to give a basic introduction to it. And I will probably in a couple of fortnights after, or maybe even next fortnight, go into examples which use most of these. So go to something a bit more complicated and a bit more advanced. But yeah, feel free to go around and start up your accounts, play around with it, add things, see what happens. And yeah, and hopefully a couple of tutorials we can move on to something a bit more complicated. Any questions? Okay. Yep. So if you have, I'm going to put this up on the blog as usual. And if you have any questions, just come ask me anytime. Okay.